To me, one of the most fascinating things to do on the channel is to dive into recruiting classes from the past and both talk about how players became big-time recruits and how they ended up doing. We're going to continue that today as we're going to take a look at the 2020 class. This was one of the weirder years in college football recruiting, as these guys arrived to campus in one of the weirdest time periods in history, which was the 2020 season, and let's see how the top 10 recruits ended up turning out. Were they bust, or did they live up to 5-star hype? We're going to take a look at that, but before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's go ahead and get started and take a look at the 2020 top 10 recruits. So coming in at number 10, we have a very interesting name in Uiagalelei Gilbert. Everybody knew about this guy coming out of high school, as Uiagalelei was the #1 tight end and the 10th best player nationally. At 6'5", he was the perfect hybrid of wide receiver and tight end, and was supposed to be on the same trajectory as a guy like Kyle Pitt. While he was at Marietta, he ended up spending a little bit of time with quarterback Harrison Bailey, and as a senior, he caught 101 passes for 1,800 yards and 14 touchdowns. He had 243 catches for 3,500 yards and 35 scores. Gilbert would decide to commit and play for LSU, and he actually got off to a great start. He ended up having 35 catches for 368 yards and 2 touchdowns as a freshman, but then the chaos would start. He decided to transfer to Florida, but then would flip to Georgia. The Bulldogs were getting a huge player, but he would not play at all during the 2021 season, as he would sit out the 2021 season due to personal reasons. He ended up having 1 catch in 2022. He ended up only having 2 catches in 2022, one of which did go for a touchdown. Gilbert would then decide to transfer to Nebraska, but he never played there and also got in trouble. Eventually, he was arrested for burglary of a liquor and vape store, and then he was arrested for obstruction and shoplifting charges. Things were very difficult for Uiagalelei Gilbert, and he ended up transferring to Savannah State on April 29th of 2025. Gilbert would end up having 19 catches for 258 yards and 1 touchdown. And obviously he didn't have great numbers at a low-level school, but Gilbert is so unbelievably physically talented that he could make a crack at jumping to the NFL. It has been a wild ride for Uiagalelei Gilbert, and he deserves his own video on the channel here soon. Coming in at number 9, we have another interesting player in Jalen Carter. He was considered the #3 defensive tackle in the class of 2020, and Carter would end up going to Georgia. This was after he had a great football career, in which he went to Apopka High School and played running back, corner, wide receiver, and linebacker. Heck, he even played quarterback at one point, and as a senior, he had 12 sacks, 64 tackles, and a touchdown. As I said, he committed to play for Georgia, and would end up playing in 8 games as a true freshman. He ended up finishing with 14 total tackles, and then in 2021, he had 37 tackles and 3 sacks. 2022 would be his best season, as he had 32 tackles, 3 pass deflections, 3 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. He was a freak of nature, and some even thought he could be the #1 overall pick, but unfortunately, he would end up getting in trouble just like Uiagalelei Gilbert. There was a car crash in 2023, and following in the footsteps of other Georgia football players, he got in big trouble on the road. A lot of this came out right before the NFL draft, but still, Jalen Carter would end up getting selected with the 9th overall pick in the first round by the Eagles. So far during his time in the NFL, Carter has been really good, as he has 107 total tackles, 12.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, and has been to a Pro Bowl and won a Super Bowl. Jalen Carter was definitely a success. In number 8, we get to talk about our first offensive lineman, and that is Paris Johnson Jr. He went to Princeton High School, which is located in Cincinnati, Ohio, and he was considered the #1 offensive tackle in the class of 2020. He's obviously the son of Paris Johnson, who was apparently a 5th-round pick out of Miami of Ohio, but Johnson had become a 5-star recruit and ended up choosing to go to Ohio State. He'd play in 5 games as a freshman in 2020, and then would also play in the 2021 College Football Playoff National Championship. He then started every game at right guard in 2021, and in 2022, he moved to left tackle and became an All-American. He was considered one of the top prospects for the 2023 NFL Draft, and he was taken with pick number 6 by the Arizona Cardinals. As a rookie, he started all 17 games for them, and like Carter, he's had a good NFL career so far. One of my favorite recruits in the class of 2020 was Ringo. He was considered the #1 corner in the class of 2020, and he came out of Saguaro High School in Scottsdale, Arizona. Ringo was a ton of fun to watch, and as a senior, he had 32 tackles, 4 TFLs, 3 pass breakups, and 3 interceptions, despite the other team not throwing the ball his way. Ringo would arrive at Georgia for the 2020 season and did most of his damage during the 2021 season. In fact, he had 34 tackles, 8 pass deflections, 1 sack, and 2 interceptions, one of which was the game-sealing interception to win the 2021 National Championship against Bama. I saw that play in person. Ringo then had a good 2022 season in which he had 42 tackles, 7 pass deflections, a forced fumble, and 2 interceptions, but for some unknown and bizarre reason, he fell all the way to the 4th round. He went with pick number 105 to the Philadelphia Eagles, because of course he did, and Ringo so far has been pretty decent. He has 65 total tackles, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, and 1 interception. He also has 4 pass deflections, and Keeley's not a superstar, but he is good and definitely lived up to the hype. At number 6, we have to talk about Dexter. He was the number 2 defensive tackle in the class of 2020, and he came out of Lake Wales High School, which was located in Lake Wales, Florida. At 6'6" and over 300 pounds, Dexter was going to be one of those guys that could help an SEC team win a national championship, and he had over 103 tackles, 18 sacks, 35 TFLs, and 7 forced fumbles as a senior. The guy was actually ridiculous, and he arrived at Florida in 2020 and ended up playing a little bit. He had 19 total tackles with 1 interception, and then in 2021, he had 50 tackles with 2.5 sacks and a pass deflection. His final season in 2022, he would have 55 tackles, 1 pass deflection, 2 sacks, and 1 interception, and eventually he was taken in the 2nd round with pick number 53 in the 2023 NFL Draft by the Chicago Bears. So far in his NFL career, Dexter has been really solid, as he's played in 45 games, has 100 total tackles, 11.5 sacks, and 4 fumble recoveries. Dexter 100% lived up to the hype and should have a long NFL career. At number 5, we had a guy who exploded into the rankings late, and that was Will Anderson. He came out of Dutchtown High School, which is located in Hampton, Georgia, and Anderson was a monster. During his senior season, he had 22 sacks and 15 tackles for loss, and went from a 4-star to a top 5 overall recruit. He would decide to sign with Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide, where Anderson would make an impact immediately. In 2020, as a true freshman, Anderson had 52 tackles and 7 sacks. The guy was absolutely insane and went even more crazy in 2021, finishing with 101 tackles and 17.5 sacks. Will Anderson was one of the best defensive end prospects we had ever seen, and in 2022, he continued it on with 51 tackles and 10 sacks. He also had a pick 6, and Will Anderson would eventually be taken with the 3rd overall pick by the Houston Texans in 2023. He then became the NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year, and things have gone nicely for him. In 3 years, he has 125 total tackles, 28.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, and 6 pass deflections. Will Anderson was a superstar in high school, college, and now in the NFL. For our next guy, we had the number 1 receiver in the class of 2020, and that was Julian Fleming. Honestly, this is the saddest story on the list, as Fleming's career did not pan out as expected. Fleming ended up becoming a superstar at Southern Columbia High School, which is located in Pennsylvania. And during his career, he ended up finishing with over 4,400 yards and 62 touchdowns, and broke a ton of Pennsylvania records. I did a video on him about a year ago, and a lot of people say he beat up on bad competition, which would end up hurting him once he got to Ohio State. Fleming was stuck in a logjam of receivers, as he had 7 catches as a freshman, and then 12 as a sophomore in 2021. His best season came in 2022, in which he had 34 catches for 533 yards and 6 touchdowns, but things then fell off once again in 2023, only having 26 catches for 270 yards, and he failed to catch a touchdown pass. Fleming would deal with on and off injuries during his time at Ohio State though, and eventually he would transfer to Penn State for his final year, and instead of becoming wide receiver 1, he was ultimately an afterthought. He only had 14 catches for 176 yards and a touchdown, and then Fleming got in some big trouble. On May 23rd of 2025, he was driving an ATV with his girlfriend, and a deer apparently jumped in front of the vehicle, which would end up ending the life of his girlfriend and left him very injured. He was then charged with vehicular homicide, and things are not looking good for Fleming right now, and it's unfortunate, and I hope it all works out in the end. One of the best players in the class of 2020 was Bresee. He was listed as the number 3 player in the country and the number 1 defensive tackle. I've been hearing about this guy for quite some time, and he went to Damascus High School in Maryland, and he was a 5-star recruit who could honestly go anywhere. In total during his career, he had 134 tackles, 80 TFLs, and 35 sacks. The guy ended up committing to play for Clemson, where he made an impact for the Tigers over the next 3 seasons. He had 23 tackles and 4 sacks as a freshman, 13 tackles as a sophomore, and then in 2022, he had 15 tackles with 3.5 sacks. Unfortunately, Brian dealt with some difficulties while he was there, as in 2021 he had an ACL tear, and then in 2022 he dealt with his little sister Ella dying from brain cancer. I remember his comeback game against Wake Forest, and that was an epic moment, and I even bought the Ella Strong shirt back in the day. Bresee would eventually get drafted in the 1st round with pick number 29 in New Orleans, and so far in his 3-year NFL career, he has 82 tackles, has played in 47 games, has 14.5 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. He definitely translated from his 5-star status. There were two huge quarterback recruits in the class of 2020, and the first one was DJ Uiagalelei. He ended up going to St. John Bosco High School, which was located in California, and DJ was supposed to be the next big thing. As a junior, he threw for 3,400 yards and 48 touchdowns, and as a senior, he threw for 4,200 yards and 48 touchdowns. Uiagalelei was truly incredible and was going to be the next great quarterback at Clemson after Trevor Lawrence. Unfortunately, DJ never lived up to the hype while he was there, as while he did have that great game against Notre Dame in 2020, his 2021 and 2022 seasons did not go according to plan. He did have about 5,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, but he struggled with interceptions, didn't win as many games, and was part of the downfall of Clemson football at that point. Looking for a change of pace, he would transfer to Oregon State in 2023, where he threw for 2,600 yards and 21 touchdowns, with 6 more scores on the ground. DJ had 1 more year of eligibility left and would transfer to Florida State and follow in the footsteps of Jordan Travis. Unfortunately, it was a terrible start for him, as he was horrible in both the Georgia Tech and Boston College game, and he threw for 1,000 yards with 6 interceptions and was eventually benched and injured. In total, DJ had just under 10,000 passing yards and 61 touchdowns in college, but he was always considered a bust. Somehow, he made the Los Angeles Chargers practice squad, and DJ honestly seems like a great guy who's been trying to battle and still make it in football, which I have to give him credit for, and I hope one day, somehow, someway, he starts for an NFL team. And finally, at number 1, we had the other quarterback, and that was Bryce Young. After originally being born in Pennsylvania, he would move to Pasadena, California, where he went to both Cathedral and Mater Dei High School. While he was there, he became the Gatorade Football Player of the Year, throwing for 4,500 yards and 58 touchdowns. In total, he had over 13,000 yards and 152 scores, and after originally committing to USC, he would flip to Alabama. Bryce Young was going to be special and played very sparingly behind Mac Jones in 2020. He then won the Heisman in 2021, throwing for 4,800 yards and 47 touchdowns, before then in 2022, throwing for 3,300 yards and 32 scores. It seemed that Bryce had regressed a bit in 2022, but it wasn't that concerning, as he was still taken with the number 1 overall pick in the 2023 draft by the Carolina Panthers. His NFL career has not gone according to plan though, as so far through 3 seasons, thrown for 7,600 yards with 44 touchdowns and 28 interceptions. The jury is still out on Young, but he hasn't lived up to the hype of being a number 1 overall pick. But what do you guys think? Of these 10 recruits, who do you think is the best? What year or position group should I do next? And before you go, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out some of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys